Director of Management Consulted, and I'm here today to talk about consulting resume anatomy. It's really helpful when you're thinking about how to build a consulting resume to understand that there's an underlying structure that the consulting firms are expecting to see from you. They're not interested in creative presentations, something totally out of the box. To them, it feels like a treasure hunt with no treasure. They don't understand how to actually get to the nuts and bolts of what they're looking for. So it's really critical when you're building your consulting resume or CV that you use a structure and a format, in short, an anatomy that's familiar to the consulting firms. So I'm going to walk through the sections that you're going to use in the document. So the first thing that's important to think about is your heading at the top. You'll want to include your name and contact information. Generally, having 2 addresses is only important if you're in university and you want to work somewhere that's different than your university location. So let's say, for example, if you came from Chicago, but you're going to school in Miami and you're interested in working back in Chicago, it might be helpful to have your home address on the document. But for the most part, the key things that they need, the things that they'll extract, are your email address and your phone number. The second piece of the consulting anatomy is an overview. This is blacked out or grayed out actually in the document now because the focus is not on having everyone have an overview. Let me be very clear. An overview is not an objective. An objective is where you say, my goal is to get this kind of job. In consulting, they're making the assumption that by nature of you applying for the job, your goal is to get the job. So you do not need to have an objective. But an overview, for those of you that have either very extensive experience or very different and varied experience, may be helpful. An overview is 2 to 3 sentences that encapsulates the core of what you bring to the table. It could highlight your project management skills, the industries that you've worked on, the core competencies that you bring to the table, or any core metrics that might be helpful for someone to understand. In short, it's similar to your elevator pitch, just a really quick sampling of what you're especially good at. If you're an undergrad, you do not need an overview. But again, if you have more experience or very different experience in your career, that might be appropriate for you. The third part that's important to include is your experience. Your experience is the core of your resume. They're assuming that for many people who will get hired at the consulting firm, you're coming from a strong educational background, but your experience is really what shapes you and makes you stand out. They're looking for brand name experience, and they're also looking for experience that trains you in skills. One of the common misconceptions is that a lot of people, especially early in their career, think that the core focus for consulting resumes is only on paid experience. But it's actually possible that an experience that you hold, if it's over a summer or over the school year term, could be equivalent to a paid work experience, even if it's volunteer or unpaid. So if you have an internship, like a co-op that was not paid, that could actually be really valuable for you to include in the experience section of your resume. So the next section of your resume that you want to include is leadership. Now, leadership is generally something that is not of a super professional nature. So you're either working with a team of classmates or you're doing something on a board of directors as a part of a community organization. It's something where you're not trying to say, I'm good at consulting in this environment, but you are saying, I'm a leader, I'm involved with my community, I'm great at working in teams. Generally, you want a maximum of 2 to 3 leadership experiences in your leadership section. You don't want 8 or 10. It just shows that you're able to spread yourself really thin, but don't go deep in certain areas. So I would much rather see 2 or 3 core experiences and understand how you held responsibility in those in the leadership section. After your leadership section, your education section will come next. Now, your education section doesn't necessarily have to come at this part of the resume. If you're currently in school or if you have a very strong educational brand, it may be appropriate to include that at the top of the resume. But because most resumes end up being 1 page, having it toward the bottom isn't necessarily a bad thing because it's not the core thing they're looking for. The experience is what they're looking for more. In the educational section, it's important not just to have the school that you went to or the degree that was conferred, but also the time that the degree was conferred, not necessarily how long you were in school, but just the date of your degree, and also any key coursework, any key honors, key scores such as GMAT or SAT scores, and any other activities that didn't necessarily fall into the leadership category but still might shed light on your involvement while you were on campus. This is important regardless of whether you're currently in school or whether you were in school 5, 10, or even 15 years ago. Even though the further you get, the more distance you can place in it, it's still important to have many of those key metrics there, just to show that you were heavily involved and very distinguished in your academic career. The next area will only be true for some of you. Those are the ones that are usually pursuing advanced degrees, either masters or PhDs. These are areas to put presentations and also to put publications. So if you've been highly published or you have a number of presentations, then this is the area that you'll want to include them. Sometimes you'll choose selected presentations or selected publications, and some of you will be able to get the rest of your resume all onto the first page, and then you'll be able to put almost an appendix to the resume with presentations and publications. For consulting, the firms really don't read this section. They're interested in seeing that you have presented and that you have published. If you published in some very famous, first author publication, that will mean a little bit more to them, but for the most part, they're not that interested in your academic credentials. They're much more interested in what you've done on the job. So it's important to have it there just to show that you have done it, but not important necessarily to focus on it in terms of allocation of real estate. Then the final area, the 7th area, is your personal area. A lot of people leave this off, but it's very critical to consulting firms because their primary asset are their people. It's important that they understand who you are as a person. This is where you can put things like language skills, any specific technical skills or expertise that you bring to the table, specific experience that didn't fit in one of the other major categories but might just be appropriate for a bullet. For example, community involvement could fit down here. And finally, your personal interests. These are good conversation starters. Things like an interest in Belgian beer or photography of still life, photography, something that just demonstrates your interest in something that's a little specific that they'll be able to start a conversation about. So these are the 7 key areas that are focused on how to build the format and the structure of the story of your resume. Again, starting with the heading, going to overview if applicable, your experience, leadership, education, presentations and publications if applicable, and then finally your personal section. If you have questions about how to put together your story into a format that makes sense for consulting firms, we would love to work with you. We offer premium consulting services to work with you on your resume edit, and we'd love to do that. So if you have more questions, you can visit us at managementconsultant.com.